I call Jan Logie.
And there are quite a few points to make in this, the first part of the bill around children's hardship package, and which is, I think it does need to, the House does need to remember that this was the bill that the government said was their ambitious response to child poverty in this country. And the fact that the most recent data tells us that over 305,000 children are living in relative poverty in this country. Not too far off, 1 in 5 children are living with significant deprivation in this country, that we've, research has told us that more than around 100 children a year die in this country from low-income related diseases that would not have died in other countries because of our policy settings. And I would like to just frame this whole discussion in the context of that is the problem that we are addressing, that we should be addressing with this bill, that I don't believe is being addressed by this bill. And I would also like to challenge the Minister's assertions are very strong, that it being very clear that there is harm from benefit dependency, and the fact that they define benefit dependency, as my understanding, at 6 months, when anyone who's managing a child with a disability would recognise that 6 months on a benefit is not something they may term as dependency, and that it's always going to be better to be in work. Because actually the research is contested around that point. And I'd reference an MSD report from a few years ago now, but I will quote it, that was looking at research from around the world, and I'll quote it. Overall, the literature would suggest that while there is a range of potential benefits from both being in paid work, for both individuals and households, for many households, a shift from being work poor, not having enough work, to becoming part of the working poor provides few gains in well-being. And this is a really key part, and this is also backed up by the Marmot Review from the UK that was a very comprehensive look at income and health, is that when we don't have really strong employment settings that provide for stable hours, good work conditions, remuneration that reflects your work, and flexibility for families in our workplaces, actually pushing people into work against their own judgment about what is best for their family is not going to deliver the well-being outcomes. And this bill is operating in a context of very, very weak employment legislation. So we have to actually look at the whole picture, and that was a substantive message from a large number of submitters on this bill, is that they wanted more. That they wanted a comprehensive response to child poverty, which deserves a comprehensive response, and this is not it. And I would like to just point out some of the very specifics that are so deeply disappointing to me in this bill. One is that the increase in the base benefit rate will come in from April of next year. This was a budget initiative for this year that will come in next year. All the time while we know that children are being hospitalised because of that lack of income, because the government's insistence on reducing and bringing their budget back into surplus, they prioritise that political measure over delivering to our families now. And to me, that's not good enough. That is not us doing our job in providing leadership and looking after everyone in this country. And that the government's been saying that they're increasing benefits by $25 a week to these families. Well, actually, the average is $23.10 a week, and the research around what was needed to actually reduce child poverty from Jonathan Boston showed that there was a really significant range. Some families may need even up to well over $100 a week increase because they're in such tough position right at the moment. But the absolute minimum that was needed was $30 a week. Only a few, Mr. Chair.
Jan Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Only a few more dollars compared to this. And this government couldn't even bring themselves to just make that the base, to get just one small group of people over the line and out of relative poverty. That, to me, is embarrassing, to be honest. And it's already been the point raised about the fact that this is per family. It's not per child. And we do know that the families that are experiencing some of the toughest challenges of poverty are our larger families. And you can imagine as a parent juggling several kids and getting back into work, that's a tougher thing. It's harder to do the more kids you've got. Anyone can work that out. And so by making this a per family increase, we're actually entrenching inequality. So the families that are struggling the most now will get, the children themselves will get the least out of this measure. And that was a policy choice of this government. They made the decision to make this a per family increase so that our children who are struggling the most right now will get the least. And they are most likely to be Māori and Pacifica families, and they are the families that protect us from an ageing population struggle in the future. They are the families that we would benefit most from protecting. And yet this government has chosen to leave them out or penalise them. And I do think we also need to look at some of the facts that around 40% of children of sole parents who have part-time work, and this is still entrenching that, though they'll be off benefit, they'll be in part-time work, live in poverty. Is this the solution for our children? I don't believe it is. When we know that we can address housing, we can address employment laws, we know that a lot more is needed in terms of income. This bill is not the answer. There were concerns raised by one of the submitters that in fact they believe that this breached the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and in terms of Article 27 and the assurance for state parties, governments, to ensure adequate standards of living. So this government had a choice to bring legislation to the House that would have guaranteed our children the right to an adequate standard of living. What they've brought to us instead is a conscious choice to leave our children in poverty, not to reduce any of those children or lift them out of relative poverty. And the minister said about the work testing and the requirement to go to work from the age of 3 that, well, you know, that half of sole parents do that anyway. So of course we should enforce, it's okay to do this, which is basically taking the choice away from parents. And she's saying, well, work and income officers, they care about the families. They'll take a lot of discretion into account. These are people who are being paid to work for work and income and have got extraordinary caseloads. They're being expected to make the decision of what is best for a family and taking away a parent's own ability to choose the needs of their child. That is bizarre to me, that we would take that choice away. And that I think it also really needs to be reminded that a significant number of these children have disabilities. I think 2 out of 5 children that get the disability support allowance have a parent on a benefit, either a sole parent benefit or the superannuation. So we know a lot of these parents have children with disabilities that will have significant needs. Already mentioned that likely to be about 70% of these families are leaving violent relationships and their children will have very significant attachment needs. And we're expecting the work and income staff to be able to have the medical knowledge or the social work knowledge or the family knowledge to make that decision. They're not living with those kids. They're not living in that family. How can we expect them to make the right decision? I think it's asking too much. And I think it actually just becomes punitive and unconstructive.
I call Carmel Cipollone.
Mr Chair, I want to